Good afternoon, Year 11. So, I'm going to start off just a short lesson today on Charles Darwin. And I want to briefly spend some time at the beginning of this lesson doing a question on natural selection, which we covered on our last live lesson, in the hope that you'll remember these stages quite happily. So, the question is, scientists believe that zebras evolved from horses which didn't have stripes. The stripes help them blend into the herd, which confuses predators, and using the theory of natural selection, write down how the stripe pattern is now found throughout the species. So the general idea is, if you have a look at this, I don't know about you, but you would struggle to count how many zebras were here because the stripes confuse the eye. It makes it difficult to count. Much easier to count a horse, which is just a solid colour. And so how would they have got these stripes? Now there are 4 stages, and it is worth 5 marks. So can you pause me and have a go at that question? Write down the answer, please. Fine, so the answers you should have got here are 1 is initially caused by a mutation, a genetic mutation, changing the DNA. 2, leading to a stripe in a zebra. Not lots of stripes, just a stripe or a couple of stripes. Which 3 helped it to break up its outline so that it survived longer. So that 4, it had more offspring. And then 5, its alleles, its stripe alleles, were passed on to its offspring, which then survived better and reproduced themselves, so that's not extra marks. So it's 1, mutation, 2, leading to a stripe, which helped to break up its outline, 3, which led to it survive better, 4, which led to it reproducing more, having more children, and 5, each of its children has a good chance of getting the allele. Fine. You need to be doing these questions in full. It comes up a lot, and we're going to do a lot of these over the course of the next few lessons. Right, we're going to watch a quick video then to talk about Charles Darwin. Now, you've definitely heard of him. We learned a little bit about him last lesson, which you did the PowerPoint. I want to talk about his life a bit more. So I'm just going to play you a quick video.
The theory of evolution was developed by Charles Darwin and published in his book On the Origin of Species. He explained that natural selection is a process behind evolution. Charles Darwin developed his theories after his adventures upon the HMS Beagle. In his travels, he observed that creatures found on the islands he visited were similar to ones found on the mainland, but appeared to be slightly different. It wasn't until he returned home that he came to the conclusion that species are specially modified to their environments, and that's why they differ. He developed found conditions explaining why this happens. Darwin's theory of natural selection by zone modification is testable and observable fact. Experiments have been conducted in the wild and in labs. Let's dive deeper into Darwin's found conditions. Condition number 1. Individuals within a population differ. There are features that differ within populations of the same animal. In our case, the feature that varies between our giraffes is different. Some giraffes are born with brown necks, some are born with short necks. Condition number 2.
So it's a different way of summarising what we have already talked about. We need to use our 4 points rather than theirs, but they described it in a slightly different way, which might be helpful to you. The question asked, who was Charles Darwin? Well, hopefully you got from the video, Charles Darwin in many ways was just a very rich man who liked to travel the world. He got himself onto a boat, not his boat, just a ship travelling the world, and he travelled around visiting hot places such as South America, Australia, and had a very nice time. He's famous for his theory of natural selection because as he was going around the world, what he was very good at was noticing things. Now, he observed creatures on the mainland and creatures on islands. He observed the differences between them. He then had a look around places like the Galapagos Isles and noticed all the different turtles and finches and all these different islands. And he noticed, this is how he came up with his theory, that they were all subtly different. They were all adapted to the places where they lived. And then describes succinctly the theory of evolution by natural selection. These are 4 points: mutation, variation, increase in offspring, and spread of characteristic in population. That's fine. Now, it's worth noting that Charles Darwin's ideas were not accepted widely when he was first publishing them. In fact, widely they were mocked, and in general, most people did not agree with his ideas. Now, there were other theories of evolution around at the time. We're going to look at those in another lesson, but they were more successful at the time than Darwin's. And there are several reasons for that. And to illustrate those, we're going to talk about this. So, let's say I came into class and I described how I'd been around the world and I had seen one of these, or perhaps a better example would be, I've been around the world and I've come up with a theory. My theory is now that dolphins evolved into humans and not monkeys. Dolphins and not monkeys. So, if I walk into a class and I tell you, right, I've been around the world, I got on a big boat, I saw some dolphins, I saw some other dolphins, I had a look at some humans. In general, I think dolphins evolved into humans. The question is, firstly, would you believe me? Initially. To which I hope the answer would be no, if you've got any sense. But then the next question is, what would you need to be convinced? How could I convince you that dolphins evolved into humans? So I'd like you to have a think about it. I don't really need you to write them down. It's something we do in class, so we can discuss them. Obviously, you're on your own in your room, so have a think. What 3 things would you need for me to convince you that we evolved from dolphins and not monkeys? Hopefully you pause me for a little while to have a think about it. The first thing you might need nowadays is genetic evidence. Maybe I could provide you with some genetic evidence that said, here's some genes, and they prove that we have such similar genes to dolphins, it makes it very likely. The downside to what Darwin had to prove was that there was no such thing as DNA as far as people were concerned at that time. People just hadn't discovered it yet. So there was no genetic evidence at all. Another thought might be, well, you might need me to be a convincing scientist. If there was a Nobel Prize winner came into the school and told you about his new theory, you might be more convinced than if your science teacher came and told you. In the same way, Darwin had the issue that he wasn't really a respected scientist. He was a well-known naturalist, somebody who collected specimens of various animals around the world. And he was respected in that field, but he was not known as a scientist in that way. A final issue might be explaining to you why current theories are wrong. Right now, we think monkeys evolved into humans. So why am I suddenly saying dolphins evolved into humans? At the time, the prevailing theory was that everything had been created exactly as it was today. I.e., that God had created all of the animals exactly as they are today. Now, this is clearly a radical change from that theory, and therefore it took a lot of convincing for people to change their idea from that to believing in natural selection. I want to make it clear that does not mean that natural selection is anti-religion, or that religious people can't believe in natural selection. It's merely that particular kind of religious belief which says that there is no change from what God created to now, that was not compatible. And that was quite widely spread at the time. It's not something many religious people believe today, that everything is exactly how it was when God created the earth. So it does not mean that if you're religious you can't follow natural selection. So that brings us on quite neatly to issues that Darwin faced. You need to know these pretty much off by heart. So we're looking at things like what we just said. Firstly, nobody knew how it worked. A key point in natural selection is knowing about genetics. And you have to understand about mutations, and nobody did. So this was all just a general idea, it wasn't proven, and there was not really any proof around. And in spite of all the long trips he'd done, he only really had some drawings of animals. Whilst it was a logical idea, natural selection, there was again no proof. He wasn't a proper scientist, I wasn't a respected scientist, just a naturalist. And again, this idea, this particular religious idea that people had at the time, which didn't fit with natural selection at all. So, those are the general issues you need to know about. I need you to pause me and take down those notes. But you don't need to be in exactly those form, but you do need to know the ideas there. Fine. Now, we're going to have a look at some questions on this. I'm actually not going to do these questions, I'm going to do a slightly different question, so I'll just pull that up. So there's a better question. Now this is linking what we did today with what we did last lesson. So we're talking about Darwin's finches, and then we're talking about why was Darwin not accepted. Now for some reason my start bar is there, I'll try and get rid of that for you. There we go. 6 marks here. Let me just remove my face entirely because I think it's getting in the way of the question. There we are. 6 marks. Give yourself 6 minutes. Can you pause me and have a go at this question, please? Fine. So, there's your answers. Now, 2 reasons from most people still believe that God made all the animals, plants on earth. Fine. Insufficient evidence. No proof. That's fine. You can write that in several different ways. Insufficient proof would probably be a better way of putting it. And the mechanism of inheritance of genes unknown at the time. And then why would we get a new species? You get basically talking about natural selection. We're talking about mutation, survival. We're talking about more offspring, and after many generations. Now we're going to cover speciation in more detail later. I anticipate you getting at least 3 marks here, because this is a natural selection question. We're talking about mutation, leading to variation, leading to survival, leading to increased offspring. If you write those 4 things, you get 3 marks. This final mark for saying after many generations the population can no longer successfully interbreed, well, that's about knowing what a species is. We're going to cover that in a later lesson. You may already have known it because we cover it in year 8 as well, but that was a long time ago, I know. So I only anticipate you getting 3 of those 4 marks. Definitely 3 of them are doable. The mutation or variation, the survival, and the passing it on to your offspring. Fine, just a short one then today. Hopefully that's been useful for you. There will also be a survey attached to the assignments, and I would like you to complete that to give me an idea of how much of these video lessons to continue to do. Have a great day.